Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Casta Diva, The Hidden Life of Maria Callas by Lyndsy Spence, narrated by Emily Ellet. Put a human note into your story, please do, because I am rather human at times. Maria Callas. Author's Note. After a season bursting with prima donnas, it is clear there is nobody like our Maria. You have it. Call it charm, call it magic, call it Maria. Doral Soria, 1961. Maria Callas was the greatest opera singer of the 20th century, and to this day she is unrivaled, la divina assoluta. But in her private life, her voice, unless she was singing, was seldom heard. She confided in those whom she trusted, not for sympathy, she was too proud, but in a bid to be understood. Dismissing her troubles, they said Callas was too strong and undermined her suffering. I wanted to give Maria, the woman, a voice. 1. Displacement. I will storm the gods and shake the universe. Medea. Euripides. The story of Maria Callas does not begin with her birth, but the sadness which preceded it. I've had to help myself, she said. Since I was a child, I knew I had to help myself. A replacement child, she was to alleviate her mother's grief after her 2-year-old son, Vasily, died in the summer of 1922. The cause of death was either typhoid or meningitis. The symptoms of both illnesses were much the same, a fever and a rash. Having consulted with an astrologer and the fatoe, a device similar to the Ouija board, her mother believed the unborn baby would be Vasily reincarnated. Some claim that trauma is inherited from our forebears, and their experiences shape our DNA. At the time of Maria's conception, which was calculated by messages from the spirit world, her parents, George and Lyndsy Spence, lived in the close confines of their apartment above his pharmacy, unable to share their grief. A note on Greek surnames. The feminine and masculine spelling and pronunciation of surnames are used in their correct context. Therefore, the spelling and pronunciation may vary. As the only pharmacist in the small town of Callas in the Peloponnese, his vocation provided a comfortable life for his wife and eldest child, Jacinthi, which included 2 maids and a cook. There was also a handyman, Christos, a handsome young soldier and Lynsy's favorite servant. To Christos she spoke for hours, exorcising her regret. My father was a general, God rest him, and I married a pharmacist. Lyndsy was 5 months into her pregnancy when George sold the pharmacy and bought 3 passages to America. Infuriated, she said that only paupers emigrated and did not consider the political situation. During the population exchange between Greece and Turkey, there was an influx of more than 1 million refugees. Furthermore, Vasily's illness and subsequent death were embedded in his psyche, and it was common knowledge that the refugees had brought with them an epidemic of viral diseases. Instead, she claimed it was due to his affair with the mayor's daughter, who became pregnant. Years later, she wrote to Maria, "Your good father is notoriously two-faced and a hypocrite, and he comes out on top. I shall tell you a great secret of your father's, which I have been keeping to myself all these years." On 2 August 1923, the family arrived in New York and were greeted by flags flying at half-mast and newspaper headlines of President Warren G. Harding's death. A superstitious woman, Lyndsy burst into tears and called it a bad omen. There were 50,000 Greeks living in New York, and they, particularly the lower classes, were considered a menace to the American working man. Attempting to fit in, George simplified their name to Callas and changed Jacinthi's name to Jackie after an immigration officer mispronounced it. Their new home was a modest apartment at 87 6th Avenue in Astoria, Queens, and they had only one friend, Dr. Leonidas Lantzounis, an orthopedic surgeon who had left Callas with $15 in his pocket. Soon, George's optimism declined, and his salary from teaching Greek at a high school could not pay their bills, and within months they ran out of money. It was into these circumstances that Maria was born, on 2 December 1923, at the Flower Fifth Avenue Hospital in Manhattan. Disappointed that her baby was a girl, Lyndsy turned her head to the window and for 4 days refused to look at her. She had wanted another blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy, and instead was presented with a daughter with raven hair and black eyes. Although George had a similar response, he suggested they name her Cecilia, but Lyndsy refused and chose Sophie. They eventually agreed on Maria, but throughout her childhood she was called Mary or Mariana. Furthermore, the day of Maria's birth was uncertain. Lyndsy said it was the 3rd, George argued it was the 4th, but Lantzounis, who had driven her to hospital and became the child's godfather, claimed it was the 2nd. She was listed as Sophie C. Callas, with her birth date as 3 December, but other documents listed it as the 2nd. Maria liked the 4th, as it was St. Barbara's Day, the patron saint of artillery, an appropriate prophecy for her life. As Maria grew older, she resented Lyndsy's recollection and viewed it as a sign that she was unwanted. Whether it was intentional or not remains unknown, for Lyndsy embellished her memories of the day with a record-breaking snowstorm, although meteorological records indicate the weather was dry but cold. In her memoirs, she wrote, "I could hear snow slapping against the window like the palm of a wet hand, and across the avenue I could see white sheets of snow sweeping through Central Park." In some ways, Lyndsy's behavior could be explained by her grief and perhaps postnatal depression. Before going to New York, she considered leaving George and returning to her mother in Athens, but thinking she was pregnant with a son, the highest status for a Greek mother, she forgot her plan and stayed with her husband. In America, however, she was isolated and lonely, with only Jackie, then 7 years old, for company. Therefore, the arrival of Maria shattered her illusions and placed her precarious mental health under further strain. "It is a cruel thing," Maria later said, "to make a child feel unwanted." Maria's earliest memories were of upheaval as she moved 9 times in 8 years to cheaper apartments in neighborhoods in Upper Manhattan, and she attended as many elementary schools. It offered her little opportunity to make friends, as Lyndsy disapproved of their working-class neighbors and would not let her daughters invite others to the apartment. Their final address was 561 West 180th Street in Washington Heights. Half a century before, it had attracted rich New Yorkers who had built their European-style castles on its rocky terrain. And in the late 1920s, it was a leafy suburb with open spaces, medieval-style architecture, and a large Greek community. Differences that had been tolerable in Greece were now magnified in New York. Lyndsy resented George's origins as the son of peasant farmers, whom she said had no ambition. She chided him for his position as a sales assistant in a pharmacy and his modest salary, which barely covered their expenses. From her perspective, she deserved better and claimed to have aristocratic lineage. Her dyed blonde hair was proof of such noble bearing. She was a fantasist. Her father, Petros Dimitriadis, had been an army general in Constantinople, who, after being invalided, gambled with disastrous results to increase his pension. Their home was sold to pay his debts, and in 1913 Lyndsy and her family moved to a rented house in Athens. It was rumored she had only married George because she was pregnant, and her real ambition was to be an actress. Her behavior, such as her heightened sexuality, or what Maria called her shameful conduct, pointed to a chemical imbalance. However, George was not blameless. He ignored the difficulties he would face in learning English and the high cost of living. He was jealous of Lyndsy, whose provocative behavior attracted the male gaze, if nothing else, and reacted furiously if she spoke to another man. When everything seemed hopeless, Lyndsy swallowed poison and was found by Maria and Jackie on the apartment floor, vomiting after having her stomach pumped. George committed her to a psychiatric ward at Bellevue Hospital, a public institution with 500 beds for the city's mentally disturbed. Using his connections, namely Leonidas Lantsounis, the incident was not reported to the police, as Lyndsy had broken the law by attempting suicide and would have faced 2 years in prison. At a young age, Maria became aware of the cyclic changes to her mother's behavior, possibly hormonal. "Hormones make our characters," she later said, and how it corresponded to the phases of the moon. However, far from understanding, George offered no support and called his wife that crazy woman. There were great highs, which preceded Lynds's dark moods, during which time she would be imaginative and playful. On their weekly outings for chop suey at a local Chinese restaurant, she pretended the inexpensive meal was a stately banquet, and at home she taught the girls how to tango and foxtrot. Nevertheless, Maria knew she could not trust those fleeting moments when Lyndsy was the most magical person on earth. As in Greek culture, the man was head of the family, but the woman was head of the house and raised the children as she saw fit. For as long as Maria could remember, Lyndsy poisoned her mind against George, lamenting him for being lazy, poor, and unambitious. He was vain and self-centered. He dyed his hair and mustache black, he lied about his age, and he seldom interacted with his daughters. Sometimes he asked Maria and Jackie questions about school, but they were too embarrassed to engage with him. At a young age, Maria knew her father was a womanizer, but she did not resent him, for she would also look for love and attention wherever she could find it. She remembered how her father loved Greek music and played it on their phonograph, but Lyndsy would charge into the room and turn it off, replacing it with operatic arias. As her parents fought, Maria sought comfort from Jackie, and for the reassurance that neither parent offered. However, Jackie was equally unhappy, and at the age of 10 contemplated suicide. Lyndsy wanted to control her children in every way, from insisting they wear hats, even though Jackie in particular hated it, and hitting them if they disobeyed her. The 2 girls shared a bed, and if they left it unmade, Lyndsy would take their clothes and throw them in the hallway of their apartment. If she suspected they were lying, she would put pepper on their lips. She had also used pepper to stop Maria, then a baby, from crying. Only once did George intervene, when Lyndsy hit Jackie over the head with an umbrella. And on another occasion he criticized her parenting style. "I had several times to say, it's not good to treat daughters this way." His new job as a traveling salesman took him away from home, which was a welcomed respite from his responsibilities toward his family. Nevertheless, Maria idolized him and thought they shared the bond of victimhood. "I always sided with my father," she said. "I was his favorite when I was a child, or maybe always." All her life, Maria believed Lyndsy suffered from undiagnosed schizophrenia, a secret she could not share. There were traits of instability in Lynds's family. One of her brothers committed suicide at 21, and her sister became a nun at the age of 12 and died of cancer 5 years later. Both were religious fanatics, prone to extreme behavior. Sometimes Lyndsy fueled her unhappiness by attending church and returning home embittered by the affluent families there. The narcissism, the highs and lows, and the swift changes in Lynds's character certainly pointed to a borderline personality problem. "They don't do enough for mental illness these days," Maria later said. All this stress on cancer, but they don't spend enough money for the mentally sick. 5 years after arriving in New York, George obtained a license to practice pharmaceuticals. With no money to open a pharmacy, he asked Leonidas Lantsounis for a loan of $10,000, which he made no effort to repay, and opened the splendid pharmacy at 483 9th Avenue at 37th Street in Hell's Kitchen. Also helping herself to Lantsounis' loan, Lyndsy took the children to her rich cousin's home in Tarpon Springs, Florida, where they stayed for 6 months. Years later, Maria recalled the days swimming in the sea and playing with her cousins as the happiest period of her childhood. Returning to New York, Maria was hit by a car after running across the road to greet her sister. "I'm seized by sudden tender impulses," she said, and feel ashamed of them immediately afterward. Dragged to the end of the street, she escaped with minor injuries and a concussion. However, Lyndsy claimed it altered her behavior. She had grown moody and viewed her sister as a rival, perhaps a feeling inspired by their mother declaring Jackie more beautiful and competent. To attract attention, whether good or bad, she interrupted Jackie's piano lessons by climbing under the pianola and working the pedals with her hands. Soon she was also taking lessons, which George considered a waste of money. 4 months later, the American economy crashed, and George was forced to close his pharmacy. Far from being sympathetic, Lyndsy berated him for losing his business and blamed him entirely for the Wall Street crash. To make ends meet, they rented a room to a Greek-Turkish couple, Callas and Otto Canar, and humiliated by their circumstances, Lyndsy claimed the lodgers were her servants. Having become obsessed with bettering her circumstances, she saw in her daughters the ability to earn money. Around that time, Maria began to imitate the opera records that Lyndsy borrowed from the library. The first recording she heard was Tosca, although she called the heroine a clown. I don't like her very much. She taught herself arias from Carmen and learned the piano score and lyrics to La Paloma, her untrained voice attracting a small crowd beneath the opened window. A Swedish neighbor overheard her singing and offered to give her free voice lessons for 2 months. Determined to turn Maria into a child star, Lyndsy was desperate to find a good voice teacher, although she could not afford it. "It's a big destiny, and it's terrifying," Maria said. "Mine is a big destiny." To pay for the $10 lessons, Lyndsy tried to pimp Jackie out to their landlord. However, Jackie refused and found work as a dressmaker's model, her salary going into the household. Maria turned to her 3 canaries and studied their throats, mimicking their muscle control and pitch. Then, Lyndsy considered it a good omen when she saw a newspaper advertising a children's talent contest hosted by Jack Benny for WOR radio station. Accompanied by Jackie on the piano, Maria sang La Paloma and A Heart That's Free, and won the second prize, a Bulova watch. The first prize went to an accordion player. There were further radio performances, and while Maria enjoyed the attention, she came to resent Lyndsy forcing her into a singing career. She could not recall a favorite toy, nor did she play as the other children did. Instead, she had to memorize arias and practice her scales. "Children should not be given this responsibility," she later said. "Children should have a wonderful childhood. I had not had it. I wish I could have." A theory exists that Maria applied for talent shows under the names Anita Duval and Nina Foresti, as her father disapproved of her singing on the radio. There is a recording from 1935 of Foresti on Major Beau's Amateur Hour, introducing herself in a mid-Atlantic accent and singing Un bel D from Madama Butterfly. The judges rated the performance as a D and noted a faint possibility for the future. According to Maria's former secretary and friend, Nadia Stensioff, she admitted to using aliases. When I was a kid, I took part in a singing competition. I called myself Anita Duval. Afterwards, I switched to Nina Foresti. I thought that sounded more like an opera singer. It contradicts what Maria told another friend. The butterfly piece is not true. I always called myself by my own name. Evidence proves that Nina Foresti was the stage name of a young Italian-American woman named Anita Duval, who gave her address as 549 West 144th Street in Washington Heights. In Foresti's application, dated 11 March 1935, for Major Beau's Amateur Hour, she wrote, "My musical studies were begun when I was 4 years old. I studied piano for many years, but as my family was in very comfortable circumstances, my music was not considered seriously. I was sent to finishing school, studied languages and singing, all as social accomplishments only. One day in 1930, upon our return from a cruise, we found our comfortable circumstances had vanished, so I have been giving piano instruction. However, I always loved to sing, so I continued my vocal studies and have sung in concerts and made my debut as Netta in Pagliacci, but as an amateur. My voice is admired, but opportunities are so few, and I find that corner, from amateur to professional, a very difficult one to turn." Duval Foresti was born Annette Duval in Pennsylvania in 1915 to a rich family who lost their fortune in the Wall Street crash. Graduating from school, she sang on the newly established radio network WCDA, and in 1928 performed as Netta in Pagliacci with the New York Opera, as mentioned in the Easton Lafayette. Next Tuesday night, October 24, the long-awaited performance of the New York Opera Company will become a reality on the stage of the Orpheum Theater. Pagliacci will be presented under the supervision and general direction of Maestro del Orefice, former coach of Enrico Caruso. The role of Netta will be played by Nina Foresti, talented American singer. After appearing on the Major Beau's Amateur Hour, she resumed her position at the department store, Strawbridge and Clothier. What remains interesting is the inclusion of Duval Foresti's Un bel dì on Maria's recordings for EMI, and that Duval Foresti never revealed her identity nor sought to correct the error. Given that her opera career petered out in 1935, perhaps she enjoyed being associated with Maria, knowing that her voice has been heard by millions. In those days, Maria sang arias suited to accomplished singers, and many believed it contributed to the vocal problems from which she later suffered. Dismissing this, she claimed she had matured early, and it correlated with her vocal development. "You see, I had my first menstruation when I was 10, she said, shocking those who asked about her precocious talent. Conflicted between the girl and the artist, Maria's formative years were marred by an internal struggle to accept her looks, despite her voice warranting her praise. She entered a period of self-loathing. She hated her dark looks, her acne and myopia, which forced her to wear thick glasses. Her mother and sister criticized her weight, although medical reports discredit any suggestion that she was overweight. At the age of 11, she weighed 119 pounds and was 5 feet 3 inches tall. 2 years later, her height was recorded as 5 feet 7 inches, perhaps causing her to be self-conscious, as she was now as tall as her father. Only when she sang did she feel loved. Toward the end of 1936, Lyndsy made plans to return to Greece so Maria could study music at the Athens Conservatory. She also claimed that her father's ghost had appeared, ordering her to leave George. Later, she said it was, "For love of Jackie, my daughter was homesick for her country." Unsurprisingly, George did not object to their leaving. Jackie sailed first, and fell to the floor, crossing himself. "At last, my God, you have pitied me." He remained in New York, relieved to be separated from his wife and free of his responsibilities toward his children. Maria remained oblivious to her parents separating. Lyndsy promised they would return in a year after she had completed her studies. She did not enroll in high school, and in the months leading up to their departure, she worked in a music shop to save money for their trip. On 20 February 1937, Maria and Lyndsy sailed to Greece on the SS Saturnia with their meager possessions and 3 canaries. After 2 days of seasickness, they emerged from their cabin, and Lyndsy began to promote Maria's talents, telling everyone she was a soprano on her way to Athens to begin a promising career. She sang La Paloma and Ave Maria in the tourist class lounge, which earned her a small income in tips. The captain, who was making his inspections, invited her to sing at church on Sunday. However, she refused, but agreed to perform at a party in the first-class dining room instead. Accompanying herself on the piano, she wore a simple blue dress with a white collar, powder on her face to cover her spots, and, as she would do later, removed her glasses before singing. Finishing with Carmen, she took a carnation from a nearby vase and threw it to the captain, who picked up the flower and kissed it. Reciprocating the gesture, he gave Maria a bouquet of flowers and a doll, the first she had ever owned. Maria's first experience of Greece was the balmy climate and scent of Daphne, and the run-down port of Patras, with passengers scrambling to collect their luggage and pass through customs. It was late when they checked into a cheap hotel before catching the morning train to Athens. She had never seen an old wooden carriage, and was not bothered by the uncomfortable seats or mediocre dish of overcooked lamb with too much gravy. Looking out the window, she seemed mesmerized by the primitive landscape of the Peloponnese, the old fortress, the peaks of the Kelmos Mountains, and the coves of the Ionian Sea. In the 14 years since Lyndsy had left, everything remained the same. But for Maria, an American-born girl with New York slang and broken Greek, everything had changed. A new identity was founded. In Greece, she said, I again became Maria Kalayeropoulou. 2. Destiny. No one ever admits he was born in poverty. There's not a beggar who, to hear him, doesn't come of high lineage. Madama Butterfly, Puccini. Maria arrived in Athens feeling sullen and anxious, something which Jackie attributed to her being alone with their mother. It was clear to them both that Lyndsy was experiencing a manic episode. The signs were evident, her fast-paced speech and enthusiasm to introduce Maria as a rising star, and demanding that she sing for her unsuspecting relatives. Please tell her to stop, Maria pleaded, despite knowing they were powerless. Sensing Maria's distress, her grandmother, Frosso, embraced her and put her at ease. Throughout the years, Lyndsy had spoken of her wealthy relatives. However, the reality of their grandmother's situation was apparent to Maria and Jackie. They had known poverty in New York, with the rich and poor often separated by one street, and the Great Depression with men jumping out of windows and sleeping in doorways. A woman of slender means, Frosso lived with her 2 unmarried daughters, whose modest civil servant wages contributed to the household, as did her late husband's army pension. Despite her limited income, Frosso paid for their nightly visits to tavernas, during which Maria consumed several helpings of tiropita, cheese pie, and bread soaked in sugar and water. This fondness for starchy foods inflamed her acne and gave her a rash on her face, probably due to some indigestion. One night, Lyndsy told Maria to sing for her brother, Efthymios, who had friends at the Athens Conservatory. She went to the piano and, accompanied by Jackie, she sang La Paloma, her shyness and nerves making her voice uneven. Polite exchanges followed, interrupted by Lyndsy asking her relatives to pay for Maria's studies. Although embarrassed, they declined and said the child's voice was nothing special. To ease the tension building between Lyndsy and her siblings, Frosso suggested she return to her husband in New York. The others advised her to enroll Maria in...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?